Let me be there in your morning. Let me be there in your night. Let me change whatever's wrong and make it right.
Good evening. You have once again reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. This is episode 76. And tonight we continue our exploration of the films from the Oscar season of 50 years ago. That's 1974. And tonight's film for discussion returns us to the so-called spaghetti western, a film called My Name is Nobody. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here at the No Name Cinema Society. As you can see, I'm back in LA for a little bit. I go back and forth between New York and Los Angeles. And I've got one panelist in each city with me tonight. First, he studied 1998 with me last year and is also one of the most renowned and feared gunslingers in all of Astoria. Angelo Santos is here. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Also with us, ladies and gentlemen, is a new kid on our society block, an actor and writer who is surprisingly just as skilled as Angelo with weaponry in spite of his goofy disposition and mysterious endgame. Doug Hurley is here, also in Los Angeles. Hey, Doug.
Yeah, hello.
He's got two guns.
I know, right?
I only need one.
Yeah.
Angelo just needs one. I don't know what that says. This new season, we're opening and closing with a song from 1974. Tonight's song comes from the recently departed Olivia Newton-John. She had a couple big hits in 1974, but the bigger of the two was the one we played tonight, Let Me Be There, the 26th biggest song of 1974. Before we get started, guys, I had a little quick, show tidbit that I wanted to share with you guys, just a few notes relating to the history of our show. Spaghetti westerns have come up a few times before on the show. We studied the film Django when we did the films of 1966, and the film Kill Them All and Come Back Alone when we studied 1970. I also named A Fistful of Dollars in my top 5 films of 1967 back in episode 46.4. And in my top 5 60s westerns in episode 55.4, I cited Once Upon a Time in the West. By this time, however, in 1974, the western overall was fading out of style, let alone the spaghetti western, which had its own unique style that perhaps we'll get into a little. This film is among those that represent the final vestiges of the singular and distinctive approach towards a very old genre. So before we get started, like thumbs up, thumbs down, or any of that, I'm curious, what is your guys' experience with the spaghetti western in general before going into tonight?
Not much recently. I remember watching them all quite a while ago, but I feel it's so in the culture for the most part.
What about you? Have you seen a lot of spaghetti westerns?
I don't think I have. If based on what I just watched, yeah, I don't think I have.
Well, I mean, the biggest, just to rattle off some names, the biggest are the Dollars trilogy, Fistful of Dollars, a few dollars more, Good, Bad, and the Ugly with Clint Eastwood, Once Upon a Time in the West, and some others include Django, which obviously the inspiration for Django Unchained to some degree, at least in terms of name. Any of those films that I mentioned? You're going to have a very different perspective from those of us that are familiar or very familiar. I did a report on spaghetti westerns once back in the day. First, a summary for the audience, like a plot summary, so they get a little sense of what we're talking about here. My name is Nobody. The titular young man Nobody is mildly obsessed with famed gunman Jack Beauregard, manipulating events to ensure his hero faces off against an infamous gang of 150 outlaws before he retires. First, I want to get a sense from you guys, just a basic sense. Did you like the film and why? Just like a sentence or two. So, Angelo, you're the veteran. We'll start with you. How'd you feel about it?
I have mixed feelings about it. While I felt some scenes were fun, it wasn't for me. I'm sorry.
Okay. We'll find out why it's not for you. Doug.
I did like it. It's interesting saying it's at the end of the spaghetti western period because you can kind of tell where it's a little bit of a self-referential or a lot of a parody, self-referential while still being the same thing. I had no idea spaghetti westerns were so funny, or really reminded me of Looney Tunes, actually. I was like, wait, these are spaghetti westerns? Until I kind of figured out and I actually looked it up. This isn't the typical, old school spaghetti western.
I mean, for his first comments, really Doug gets a bingo, I think. First time in the show, first things he ever says in the show, he gets a bingo because he basically puts on a lot of the things that I have in my script to talk about tonight. My comment is the action is mostly interesting and exciting, along with the theme. So on the whole, that's enough to make up for some of its more unorthodox elements. And Doug touched on those a little bit. So I would like to start with direction and just a little context on Tonino Valleri here, who's the director of tonight's film. He was a disciple of Sergio Leone. For Angelo's sake, is the godfather of the spaghetti western. He's like their great auteur. Tony Valleri was an AD for a few dollars more. He was a co-writer of Fistful of Dollars. As a director, he would work well into the 90s, specializing in masculine action-type pieces. In terms of my personal evaluation of his work, in spite of some significant perceived missteps, I personally feel like the film does deliver on the best elements of the genre, namely the outstanding Western action and overwhelmingly epic cinematicism. Valleri picks up where his mentor left off on this front. Certain set pieces and many shots were exciting and inspiring. I feel like they pull out all the stops, almost as if it were a game of one-upsmanship, to do better than the previous spaghetti western before it, et cetera, et cetera. And the results are often wonderful, with an extremely evocative use of depth of frame within a frame, the famously tight close-ups, camera movement, and sound design. And of course, with Ennio Morricone back in action, the music is obviously a highlight. As Doug sort of insinuated, it's lovingly derivative, not only of spaghetti western, but also American western tropes that he seemed to poke fun at, which I'll get to in a bit.
It kind of reminds me now that you're saying that about any of the horror comedies, or like, I don't want to call them parodies, but like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz. You're playing with tropes, you're making fun of it, but it's also still a great version of that type of movie.
That's an interesting comp, especially because, from my experience with spaghetti westerns, like I get to this when we get to the script portion of it, but this is sillier.
Oh, yeah.
Other spaghetti westerns have like winks and little jokes.
There's one character that's kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah. This is significantly wackier, almost in a self-aware way.
Well, and everything you said in terms of the cinematography and all that, I agree with. The issue for me was I didn't know the tone of it. Doug brought up the Looney Tunes aspect, and it's like, okay, that's kind of fun, but it didn't seem very cohesive to me.
I also was unable to get in on the tone for a while, but I wondered if that had more to do with my experience with spaghetti westerns than the actual tone. I couldn't think of anything where it didn't match itself tonally. But I guess Henry Fonda's action scenes are more serious than Terence Hill's action scenes, so maybe that's a disconnect tonally.
Yeah.
So I can see that, and I definitely had trouble, but I thought maybe it was just me. This was veering off into another direction than what I was used to, and that was the issue. But maybe there was an issue within the film itself.
I feel like if you watched it a second time, it's kind of like what you said. I don't necessarily think it didn't totally match with itself. Like, it had its own tone that technically it was the same tone all the way through, but since it was like a mashup of a couple of different things that we're used to and trying to figure out versus its own unique tone. The Terence Hill character, his performance kind of tied all the tone together because it reminded me of Roberto Benigni or somebody, like a lot of bits first with the character. I was like, is he autistic? Is he? And then I was like, oh no, he's like Bugs Bunny. Like, no, for real. Which I also could be Bugs Bunny.
He's equally like a puppeteer to some degree, like Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, he's like, is he even a person? Is this a trickster god? Is this like a metaphor for?
Is it Loki?
I mean, I loved it, but like that's what I thought it was like Bugs Bunny or something. I thought the tone was okay to itself, but also, even if something's consistent to itself, does that make it good or watchable? Like, oh yeah, you succeeded, but it's not for me. So I can see where Angelo's coming from, because I had moments of that as well. A shot that I thought was pretty cool. Henry Fonda's there, and then the 150 Wild Bunch are coming at him, but instead of what you would normally have probably today, which is like him, and then them riding really hard, close up of them, and then him, and it's getting closer, and them and him, and like a really quick cut. It was just like he's standing there, they're like way off. And like in real time, they're getting closer, so you can actually like, oh, this is how he would feel. Like slowly but surely all these people, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You wouldn't do it as much today. There's a different attention span. There was a different filmmaking style. So
Shots like that, like consistently within the spaghetti western genre, Leone or otherwise, the hallmarks are consistently great framing with a lot of depth and also just absolutely awesome Morricone music. Those are the
100%.
things that really elevated this genre to where it was for a good 7-8 year period. Angelo, so we talked a lot about this tonal issue. Do you feel differently about it now that we've talked about it, or do you feel like still like it was two different movies?
I feel like it was still two different movies because I loved everything about, like, I guess what's in the spaghetti western, like a lot of the shots, a lot of the long shots. It's funny, that scene that you just described, Doug, at the end, that's one of my favorite shots. I was hoping the movie was going to end with that shot.
You just wanted the movie to end, period.
That too, but I was like, this is a great shot to end, you know, because it's like, you don't know what's going to happen, you know, at the end, right?
No,
so I thought that's how it was going to end, and then
that would be great.
I talked about one-upsmanship because I definitely thought there were moments that were just about pushing the envelope. Like, oh, you know, Leone did this in his last film, so we're going to do something more crazy. Or we're going to have a hero that frees refugees but steals from babies. We're going to push that envelope constantly just to push the envelope. Moving on from the director, because Doug really wants to talk about performances, and so I'm going to segue to that. And I've already sort of suggested that there is a mixed bag. Obviously, with a lot of the Italian actors either forced to speak English or be dubbed, that's awkward in and of itself. But you know, in talking about the two main performances, Terence Hill is not an actor I was too familiar with prior to this. And you know, do you guys remember what they called the Clint Eastwood character in all those films?
The whatever without a name.
Right. He's the man with no name. Which again, this is a joke. My name is nobody is almost this self-reflective on man with no name. That's Terence Hill here in this section, literally named Nobody. And he turns this character into something akin to the Joker. Doug talked about Bugs Bunny, but I went a little darker, I guess, because I did think of him as someone driven by chaos and an unusual code. Not that he's sadistic like the Joker. He's more of a trickster, a destructive imp. Talented, smart, but unhinged in a way that never quite sat well. And I think what Doug was saying is it was a bold swing by this actor, Hill, seemingly obedient to the director's extreme ideas, but to me, he wasn't able to quite pull it off in a satisfactory manner, to my mind. He went all out, so I give him credit from that point of view, but it seems like he was a little more all over the place. That you know, we as an audience were not able to put our finger on him, and I'm not sure he as an actor was either. It seems like it was too much to ask. And frankly, the script was playing something of a shell game with the plot and characters, which may have put it in a bad position. Clint Eastwood couldn't have played the silliness of this particular man with no name, but Hill still lacks Eastwood's presence. So we're mostly left with no one to root for in the same way that we root for Eastwood's man with no name, or even Charles Bronson in Once Upon a Time in the West. Doug, you talked about him a couple times, so that's my reaction to Terence Hill. What do you think?
Nice. It's interesting that you mentioned the Joker is somebody that you can't really get in their head and can't be the lead of the film, but he is. So we don't invest much in Fonda's character. He's going through his thing and we have empathy for him, but it's not like it's just his point of view. But I'm curious if the actor is the one who is like, hey, I want to just do this crazy mugging, you know, or if like it was kind of there, or the guy was like, yeah, do that. I do feel, even if it was too much at times it was, and not overly successful, I do feel as much as the two different genres were tied together to be kind of cohesive on tone. So it was kind of only because of Terence Hill. Like that was like the only thing that tied him together, was him kind of being grounded and believable, and then him being crazy. Yeah, he wasn't perfect and maybe he went too far, but I do applaud him that like everything would have completely crashed and burned had he not kind of been able to channel a little bit of both, but also what a weird character. What's that guy doing?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple theories on that. And in terms of, you know, the first thing about his devices versus if is he just following a director's vision? My theory is it's the latter for a couple reasons. First, the extremity of it. Also, but Terence Hill needed this film more than it needed Terence Hill. Like he was not on a big television show like Rawhide the way Clint Eastwood was. So he was probably more game. Like if he were a bigger star like Henry Fonda, he probably would be reluctant to do some of those things. Or might have talked back a little bit or something. Whereas I think Terence Hill thought this might make him a star, and he's going to do whatever the director wants.
Of course. Yeah, if he was doing it and the director didn't like it, especially if he's not a big star, the director could be, what the hell? What are you doing? Stop doing that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
that makes sense.
Crazy. The other theory that I also am not convinced Terence Hill as an actor knew the end game the whole time, or at least in every scene. You even insinuated that he's so different from one scene to another. I sometimes wondered if, like, in an early opening scene, he knew what his goal was. We as an audience don't figure it out till much later, but it did not seem like, in certain scenes it seems like he had some idea, or some scenes he had idea of that there was something up his sleeve, but he wasn't sure what. Like I was not convinced that he understood in every scene what was going on with his character, and he should have, or he needed to make this character cohesive.
Yeah, that gets to the whole chaos that you brought up too, because it seemed like half the movie he was just like literally a clown. We made this clown movie. I guess we should go do reshoots to kind of try and make it a Western and like put it together.
I think it's interesting that you brought up Roberto Benigni in the sense that also Italian, and so there's this connection to the Commedia dell'arte, this whole clown college that they have developed out there. I don't exactly know that Terence Hill was related to that institution in particular. It does have elements of that training.
It's actually an Italian movie. Like, that's in the culture. Like, that's what we like. That's what we understand.
Angelo, Terence Hill.
What?
I'm waiting for it. Let's go.
I mean, I really don't have any comments.
Do you agree or disagree with anything we said?
I kind of agree with everything you said, but I just found it a little ridiculous. It was part of the whole tonal aspect too. I wasn't expecting that, given that first scene. Like that first scene, great, right? And then it's just, where's it going?
There's a very Western scene in the barber shop. That's why I was kind of surprised too, because you were saying I did. Terence Hill actually did have, at least in the beginning, presence. I'm like, oh, who's this guy? A minute later, Terence Hill is like, like what happened?
Clearly intentional, right? Like it's such a big swing. It's not an accident.
Oh yeah, and then like about 2 minutes after that, like Wikipedia, I'm like, oh okay.
So that brings us to the other performance in the movie, and so this was a bit of a saving grace because although generally I've always said that Henry Fonda is a little bit overrated, but in this particular movie, he's a bit of a grounding presence, consistently and believably asking the questions that the rest of us are. Why exactly is all this happening? He's just as confused as we are. I tend to find Fonda more one note, at least compared to his contemporaries like Bogart or Jimmy Stewart or Jimmy Cagney. But his work in the spaghetti westerns are an odd exception, perhaps by way of comparison. I did appreciate Henry Fonda in this movie, not as good as he was in Once Upon a Time in the West, but I think still the saving grace of this movie are extremely watchable and interesting.
I didn't know Henry Fonda was in the spaghetti westerns. I thought I was like, what is Henry Fonda doing a western for? It's funny that you said, oh, you think he's overrated. He's one tone, because that is exactly what I thought about him in this movie. I was like, oh my gosh, why is he doing this movie?
I did think there was more going on with his character, consistently processing why is nobody likes me a lot, but also he's a danger, or like, but I've also got this other thing that I'm trying to solve and resolve. So like, I felt like he had stuff going on underneath the eyes. So I disagree on the one note in this movie. Doug, Henry Fonda.
I thought he was good in it. I do feel that I agree with both of you because I kind of feel like he just had to be there. Like it fit him very well. We need you to be later on in your career. We need you to be kind of over it, have some life experience in your eye, but it wasn't like Grapes of Wrath. You gotta be this and this. Like it's not just like, hey, you have to stand here, but kind of also too, how could you not act bewildered and confused with this other character? Oh yeah, he did a great job. Yeah, because he was like, what's this guy doing?
Yeah, I mean, I can see your points. Like, it was a lot of things, you know, being a person at the end of their career, of someone renowned. He can identify with a lot of those things and identify with not understanding what Terence Hill was doing. I did believe those moments more than I believe Henry Fonda in his early 40s work. So, but yes, I can see your points of view. But I more than both of you, it sounds like it seems like I saw him trying to find a little bit more of what's going on with this character. Like I saw moments of nostalgia, moments of wistfulness that I attributed to him as an actor because, you know, as we're about to talk about, I'm not sure it's in the script. A actor that's been doing it for 40 years, elevating a character in my mind. That's how I'm looking. I'm not saying it's an Oscar-worthy performance.
I thought it was really good. I had no problems with it. I'm just kind of basing that on you being like, oh, I didn't think he was that great. I'm like, well, maybe, you know, these things that I mentioned helped him out. There's a scene where he's like being a sniper or whatever, and he puts on the glasses. Like, he looks like he's in Golden Pond here. Like, all of a sudden,
it is the same glasses he wore in Golden Pond. So
it's the same character. It's his grandson, you know.
To Angelo's point, what I think is true of all spaghetti westerns is, and this is a good segue into Screenplay, is dialogue is not relied upon. It is de-emphasized, right. And that's a good lesson for visual filmmakers. It is a visual medium, and so, you know, maybe they were popular in spite of their dialogue. Clever dialogue doesn't make great films on their own.
Right. And the close-up, so you could really see what they were thinking, since they were talking all based on the fact, partially an artistic decision, but also like these are limitations.
Unlike the majority of the spaghetti westerns, which featured tongue-in-cheek elements and winks, this one was squarely a comedy, which sort of sets it apart. Unfortunately, I feel like it's only occasionally funny. The plot is sadly ridiculous, and any hope I had of the script surprising me and turning things around was washed away around the second plot point. Like many of these films, the nuts and bolts of the plot, meaning the actual events that happen to the characters, are de-emphasized in favor of the themes that we'll talk about in a minute. The ones with stronger plots are the ones that have lasted. Fistful of Dollars, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West. But here the plot points seem almost reverse engineered to accomplish some potential larger mission. As I intimated earlier, much of the movie is spent with you trying to ascertain motivations for seemingly bizarre behavior, and only in the film's final moments does it make any sense. Not a lot of sense, but some sense. Like, I see the logic, but it's not great logic, and it's more about some points that they were trying to make that we'll get to in the T word, and I don't want to dig into now. So that aspect of it was somewhat dissatisfying to me.
Pretty much like explaining the end, which I hate, right? It's like, oh, now we get the explanation, and through a narrative, right, or through a voiceover, and it's like, that's kind of just, I don't know. I don't know. Like, you said it was a comedy, or the script was a comedy, but the way they started off, it didn't feel like a comedy. I just felt it was like just all over the place. And this
might be the film that I've made Angelo watch that he likes the least. This is the most negative I've ever seen Angelo.
Yeah,
Doug, Screenplay.
I see what you're saying about like the logic makes sense afterwards, but I also feel, in addition to that being true, some of the logic you're like, I get what he's going, and some of it's like, oh yeah, he must have done that because of this. Overall, I feel like, as far as script, was like half a script. I'm sure with the spaghetti westerns too, things are a little bit elongated. There's like longer shots. So obviously that can stretch out a plot. I bought it. It was a cool little setup, but it wasn't fleshed out, and it wasn't a feature from what they put in it as it stands now.
Yeah. And that sort of speaks to what I was saying about it feeling reverse engineered. This section is going to be new to Doug, and I feel like we've been building up to it all night. I keep saying we're going to get to it. So, Angelo, it's your favorite part of this show. What do we call it?
It is the T word time.
It is the T word. This is the section where we talk about themes of the film. One of our founding members, Davey, hated talking about themes, and so the rest of us that wanted to talk about it, we danced around it, called it the T word. A segment was born. I have a couple different things that are sort of intertwined, guys. So it's like essay time. I'm going to present an essay essentially to you guys for you to either agree with or disagree with. Ultimately, to me, the film seems to be concerned with glory and, by extension, legacy. It seems to land on the idea that notoriety of any kind means immortality, and that should almost be the goal of life. To make enough of an impact that you will last beyond your mortal coil. Furthermore, it seems to acknowledge that the perception is the reality. It is not always about what you actually accomplish, but what you are remembered to accomplish. As they famously say in another Western, between the truth and the legend, print the legend. In its own strange, backwards way, I do feel like this film is fairly successful in that particular exploration in spite of its roundabout way of getting there. And honestly, that need to matter for posterity seems to be tied with this concept of masculinity, which has come up a few times in our exploration of the films of 1974, albeit in different ways. The exploration of what it means to be a man is a staple of the Western in general, but it's usually about the limits of bravery or an ethical or moral code. But that's more in the heat of the moment. This film has more long-term concerns. The true test of what makes a real man is what he leaves behind. But the mise-en-scène seems to suggest all this extends to the genre of the spaghetti Western itself. There are constant references to other Westerns, both their own films and other variations on the genre. It borrows shots and references other Westerns throughout the background, names of saloons, characters, etc. As we intimated, it lovingly mocks its own reputation for always having a nameless hero. The famous Man with No Name, previously played by Eastwood or Bronson, is literally here called Nobody. But it also seems to flat-out attack its competitors of the time, full-on referring to the villains in the film as the Wild Bunch and giving poor Sam Peckinpah his own headstone in the cemetery. There seems to be a self-awareness that their contribution to the Western was fading out of the zeitgeist, kind of in the way that Jack Beauregard was. And it felt like the film wanted to make sure that this subgenre, so connected to its country and culture of origin, cemented its own place in film history. Like, it's about legacy for men, but also legacy for them as filmmakers in this fading out genre. So those are my theories in terms of themes. What do you guys think? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Get A+ for your essay.
Oh, thank you.
Because I would never have gotten that from watching this, mainly because I was not a fan of the movie, so I didn't really pick up on any of the themes. But the themes you did bring up, I see now, and I liked sort of the thing you said towards where it was kind of acknowledging and paying homage to a lot of what came behind. I heard the Wild Bunch. It's like, oh, hearing what you said, JB, I'm almost like, I might change my mind now.
I love that. The power to change someone's mind.
From an academic standpoint, I like the movie now.
That's the most positive thing I could possibly hear. Doug, what do you think about my themes?
Great, I love your themes. I will say, though, that with the Peckinpah thing, all the self-referential things, like the Nobody, which I didn't catch, but makes perfect sense, and the Wild Bunch I was okay with, and all the reference, great. The Peckinpah thing totally took me out. I felt like that was very fourth wall breaking. It is interesting. I didn't think about it, but I think you're right about legacy. There's the theme from Fonda's character, Beauregard, about, retiring, all that. And it doesn't seem like he's concerned with legacy. But also, he does have one, and he's lived it. He's an older man, maybe realizing legacy doesn't matter, and blah, 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 or his own personal bent on whatever, where our trickster god, Nobody. And maybe in some ways the most human part of him was his concern with legacy.
Weirdly, not even his own.
I feel like he's tied himself to his hero. He's like, I wanted to be you. So he's kind of projected himself on him in a way, maybe subconsciously having his own legacy by having his idol having a legacy. What is the meaning of a man that he does enough stuff in his life that he would have a legacy? It's not even the legacy. It's just like, in order to be a man, you have to do all this stuff, or I don't have a penny to my name or a family, but I have my legacy. Maybe he's trying to give his dad, his grandpa, his projection, his hero, the legacy to somehow validate himself.
In hindsight, Nobody's sole goal here, his primary goal, is to have this showdown. Not that he hates the Wild Bunch. It's not vindictive against the Wild Bunch. This whole thing is he wanted his hero to have this moment. He can die if he wants to, but he still did it, because that's what a real man would do. And that is Nobody's entire motivation. Like, we don't find it out later.
You're like, why?
For all the complaints and stuff, I just want to point out that I'm a net positive on this movie. A lot of the filmmaking, I think, puts it over the top for me. And, it does have thematic exploration, but it does pale in comparison to a lot of its brethren in this subgenre. So I just want to be clear about that in case I wasn't earlier. So closing thoughts. Let's go to Doug first. Your first show, Doug. How do you feel?
So great.
Yeah, fun. Like, what do you think? Like,
No,
walking away.
this was good. I'm glad to have seen this film that I would have seen otherwise. Yeah, I'm not positive on it for sure. And even if you don't like it, I'm like, good job, Terence Hill, and whatever that was. You did an excellent job. And I'd be kind of interested in seeing some of his other work to see if that carries over. If that carries over 15%, the perfect amount, or if it's over the top. Like a little bit of seasoning, too much pepper in the soup messes it up. Just a little makes it great. A little bit too much makes my soup is nobody.
Angelo, closing thoughts for you.
I wanted to like this movie. Like the shots are great. Like you said, there's two stories going on here, Western comedy, and I think each of them work on its own. It just didn't work together.
So the follow-up question would then be, for both of you, after seeing this, we talked about a lot of other spaghetti westerns. Are any of you curious to go explore more of the genre that you don't know so well?
Yes, I'm spaghetti western curious. I'd also be interested.
Where do you start?
I think most people are. Let's be honest.
I would start with the beginning of the Dollars trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars. It's only 90 minutes, lean and mean. They get longer and longer as they go. Fistful of Dollars with Clint Eastwood in his first collaboration with Sergio Leone. A good entry drug is Fistful of Dollars, I think.
Nice.
All right, guys. So next up on the No Name Cinema Society, Alexander Salkind takes on Dumas with the 70s version of The Three Musketeers. And that'll be the next film we review on the No Name Cinema Society. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Doug and Angelo to say goodbye to the audience.
See you later. Thanks for showing.
Can I do that thing?
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this 76th meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.
All I ask you is let me